Hey, what's going on? Welcome back to Iron Anchor Cycles. I'm Shep, and it's time for another installment in our FXR build series. So I know a lot of you have been waiting, and frankly so have I, for us to finally get started with the wiring on this bike, and that is exactly what we're going to do today. So before we get going, as usual, I like to talk a little bit about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and give you a little bit of context that hopefully will be helpful in terms of maybe thinking about wanting to do something like this on your own bike, whether it's an FXR or something else. So rewinding back a little bit, and I'm trying to just think back to the beginning of the thought process on this, we were looking for a project FXR. I knew the bike that we wanted to build, I had a vision for it, and kind of had everything pretty much mapped out before we ever even found the bike that we were going to do the build on. So one of the things that was pretty high on the list things that we knew we were going to have to do was deal with the wiring on the bike. And again, that was without ever having seen the bike that was eventually going to become our project. One of the things that we know about Harleys, particularly of a certain age, is the electronic systems on them have a lot of pretty weak points, just in terms of old technology, a lot of mechanical or moving parts, as opposed to a lot of the computer-controlled or solid-state electronics you'd find on a more modern bike. That, combined with a bike that, you know, has been on the road for nearly 30 years in our case, you tend to find a lot of hackery and a lot of really jacked up wiring harnesses on these bikes. You've got people who, you know, want to change turn signals and taillights and horns and switches and all the other kinds of stuff, adding on accessories, and most people really just don't know how to do wiring properly or in any clean kind of a manner, so you wind up with wiring harnesses that are cut and spliced and taped, and I mean, I get bikes in the shop that have butt connectors holding wires together, so you really never know what you're going to find in terms of the wiring harness, particularly on an older multi-owner bike. So right from the outset, we just said, you know what, we're going to take this opportunity to run an M.Unit on one of these bikes. Now, I'll talk a little bit about what that is, and actually I've got ours right here. So this is from Motogadget. Motogadget is a European company. I want to say German, but it may be a country. Yep, Germany. That's what I thought. What that means is that this is a very, very popular item, and it's a very popular brand in the European bike world. So you'll see a lot of cafe racers, sort of bikes of that style, people running these on Triumphs and, you know, Japanese bikes, really anything other than a heavyweight American V-twin. Although, to be fair, there are a lot of people who have put these now on Harleys, a bunch of FXRs, some sort of custom chopper applications, but needless to say, this is a much less familiar product in the Harley market than it is in the metric world. So if you check out Revival Cycles, they're based in Texas. They sell these. They're a dealer for Motogadget. They have a ton of videos on YouTube about how these work, what they do, kind of how to set them up and program them, and also a lot of other Motogadget products. And that's not surprising given that Revival deals in mostly metric bikes, not Harleys. There's a lot of great information on what this product can do and how it works. What really is not out there on YouTube, at least that I've been able to find, and why I thought this video was so important, is how to apply this to a Harley. Now, I'm obviously not going to be able to give you the entire story on how to do it, but I'm going to try and at least show you what it takes to put it on this one and give you some, you know, tips and call-outs. I'm definitely not the first person to do this. There's many, many people who have put these on FXRs, so if you search the internet, you can find some of this information, but I just really haven't seen a great YouTube video on it, so I figured we would do it. Really, at the outset of this, the plan here was to run the M.Unit on the FXR because the assumption was the wiring harness was going to be trashed, and what this M.Unit allows you to do is it doesn't control everything on the bike, but all of the sort of main regular circuits are all going to run through this unit, and this is a solid-state computer-controlled device, essentially, that will act as every relay, flasher, circuit breaker fuse on the bike. Basically, you'll run one fuse going from your battery into the unit. You have a whole bunch of inputs for switches, and a whole bunch of outputs for functions. The inputs and the outputs are not directly connected to one another. What you have here is this is acting as a controller, and it is using an electrical signal. In actuality, it's a ground signal. As you ground each of these inputs, it's giving an instruction to the chip inside of the M.Unit, which is then telling it to provide power in some way to one of these outputs. Now, what that means is that it's all very low voltage on the switch side. So there's very, very little current running through these switch wires, which gives you the ability to run extremely small gauge wires for your handlebars and really any other switches that you're gonna run. It just makes the wiring easier and cleaner. Beyond that, I don't know how much we'll get into it because there really are some good videos from others on the customizable functionality of this device, but there's so much ability for you to link different things together, for you to decide whether the switches should be momentary or they should be always on, always off, you know, or you know, push on, push off, or something that's by default on, by default off. All of this stuff is programmable and customizable, which makes this a really, really powerful, sophisticated device. Now, talk about our bike. As it turns out, this is really not necessary. Once we got our bike bought and got it on the lift and started to look at the wiring that we had, come to realize that the wiring harness on this bike is 100% original and intact. There are no cuts, no splices, no alterations. Can't speak to how good the circuit breakers are or any of this other stuff, but we haven't found any problems with any of the wiring. So in a situation like that, were this just a bike we were doing for a customer or something that, you know, somebody was doing on their own, my recommendation in that scenario would have been leave it alone. Update what you need to update, change some circuit breakers as needed, test everything, make sure your grounds are good, but just run it. There's really not a whole lot of reason to spend the money and considerable time to do this when there's not really a problem that needs to be corrected. In our case, however, I had committed early on that this is what we were going to do, and I really just wanted to take the opportunity to make this video and sort of show people what it could look like and how it works. So even though it's really not functionally necessary for this particular bike, we are going to go ahead and install this. There are some benefits, don't get me wrong, that, you know, the original harness is not necessarily set up to do that this can do. Some little things, for example, your turn signals. Obviously, most if not everybody knows that the older Harleys need load equalizers if you're going to run LED turn signals. Well, this doesn't need that because it's all digitally controlled. No need for a load equalizer. We're running LED turn signals. That's something we would have had to add on with the original harness. Additionally, your turn signals in terms of the cancellation feature. In many cases on many Harleys, when you remove the factory speedometer, there's actually essentially a reed valve or something like that that's in there that is what is actually causing the cancellation on your turn signals. You take off that original speedometer, which we didn't want to run because I wanted to eliminate the cable-driven speedo. This has a cancellation feature built into it. So those little things are not necessarily a good enough reason to do this. Really, the beauty of this is that the electronics are going to be 100% functional with new wire. Everything is going to work right. And these are also really, really easy to diagnose electrical problems with. So basically what we're doing here is getting out in front of any issues that may occur by just kind of starting from scratch and running all new wiring. So I did mention the elimination of the cable-driven speedo. We are running also a Motogadget Motoscope speedometer or gauge, as they call it. So that is something we'll talk about a little later. It'll be part of this project, but I'm not going to get into it right now. And that comes with a speed pickup that you can put on either your front or rear wheel to eliminate that big cable that comes off your front wheel. So we're going to do all of that. Right now, the first step is going to be to take the original harness off the bike. Now, as I mentioned, our harness is in perfect condition, so I'm really not looking to just start cutting and start hacking stuff up and ruin a perfectly good wiring harness. One, because just ruining things for the sake of ruining them is just not cool. And number two, leaving the original harness intact may help to be a good reference for us down the road if we can't figure out how something was connected or something like that. Having the original harness intact will be helpful. So basically what you have is the backbone of the harness sort of runs along the backbone of the bike. You've got some pieces come off here. You've got your ignition switch. You've got your wiring for your ignition coil. Goes up into the headlight bucket, and there's a ton of wires in there, and then that branches off to go to your switch control pods. Going the other way, the harness comes to the back, comes to your left side cover. You've got your circuit breakers over here. You've got the feed for the rear fender harness here. The harness then kind of makes a right turn, goes down beneath the battery box, goes over to the right side of the bike where it makes the connections with your ignition module as well as the horn and some of the other sensors and things that are over there. So I'm going to attempt to take this all out as one piece. I know that I can. What may have to happen just so that it can fit around and through some of these holes is we may need to de-pin some connectors to get them through where they needed to go and then put them back together. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to take our time, make sure that it all comes out in one piece, and we'll regroup with the beginning of starting to put the new harness in place. And we'll probably take another look at the M.Unit as well, just so that we can get a sense of what some of those functionalities are going to be. So stick around if this is interesting for you. I have a feeling this might be a pretty long video, so if it needs to be broken into 2 parts, that's what we'll do, but I'm going to have at it and get started right now. All right, so here's our wiring harness removed from the bike. Really not that big of a deal. Like I mentioned, there are a couple of places where you might need to de-pin some of the larger connectors in order to get them to pass through some of the spots on the bike. The headlight is one that comes to mind. There's a few that have to be de-pinned so you can get the harness out of it. But other than that, the whole thing really comes off in one piece. You got your switch pods here, you know, all your wiring. The 2 side panels, just took them right off with everything connected to them. You can see when it's laid out this way that there's actually really not that much wiring that goes on in one of these bikes. So we don't have a huge amount to do to get this rewired. Certainly nothing like there would be on a fuel-injected bike or something running an ECU or a BCM or any of that other stuff from a more modern application. So basically what we're going to be doing is just replacing all these circuits in just a different configuration based on the way the M.Unit works. So just kind of wanted to show you what this looks like, all taken off in one piece. We'll go back over to the bike and we'll continue on with starting the install. Okay, so with our wiring harness removed from the bike, we now have a nice clean slate to work with to start getting our new harness built and installed. What you'll see left on the bike, obviously there's still some wires kind of floating around here. These are the feeds from the new taillight wiring that we did. These will need to get plugged in. We've got our battery negative and positive cables that are still in place. A couple of other little things. This is the VOES switch wire that's still here. So some of those components that are still on the bike still have their wiring attached, but the main harness is out and we're ready to get moving. So the first step that we're going to do is start to figure out getting locations for everything. That's actually made pretty easy for us. We got a new set of side plates. These are made out of stainless steel. They're really nice. Got these from FXR division. So they're set up with holes and grommets for some wiring harnesses, pre-drilled to mount the M.Unit, which is nice. You've got a plug here for your oil drain. We've actually got a plug in ours so that it doesn't pour out while we're working here. May use this, may put it on here. We'll see how it goes. But essentially, you know, these are going to replace those old stamped steel ones that were there before. And then basically we'll use them to mount some of the components that we need to mount. So we'll get started by kind of getting some things mocked up in place, start to run some wires and start to build out the harness. Now that we've got our side panels in and we've got the M.Unit just sort of tacked in place here, if you will, these are the 2 mounting screws. They're also used as grounds, so those will come on and off a couple times as we start to get the wires connected. But you can start to see how this is going to come together. Now, one of the things that's really important about doing this is that you make sure to create a new harness that's modular so that you're able to remove components the same way you would on the factory harness. We'll actually even do it one step better than they did on the older bikes. You know, if you're familiar with the new bikes, you'll know that the front section, for example, each switch housing has its own plug, the headlight has its own plug, it can all come apart. Whereas on the older bikes where everything runs through the headlight, there tends to be a little bit of kind of a mess there of sort of everything goes into the headlight, the harnesses are intertwined, and it's a little difficult to just remove individual components. So we're not going to do any of that nonsense with everything running through the headlight. We're going to give every component its own sort of section of the harness and use Deutsch connectors to make it modular. So to that end, what we started to do here is start to make some harnesses. Now, you can kind of use whatever connectors you want in whatever configuration you want. And these Deutsch connectors obviously come in, anything from, as small as 2 to, 12 or larger pins in them. So you can, pick the ones you need to make it work. Now, in this particular case, what I've got here is this one here, which is a 12-pin connector, and we've used 9 of the pins. This is going to be for our switch controls, both left and right. And then this is a 6-pin connector that we've used 4 of the pins on, and this is for our turn signals, not the controls, but the actual front turn signals. So both of these are the bike side of the harness that will ultimately connect to the handlebars. So these 2 plugs are where the male plugs from the handlebars will plug in, and then this wiring harness will run back to the appropriate plugs here on the M-Unit or wherever they need to go. In the case of these wires, it is in fact, I believe, the case that all of them will run to the M-Unit. There are some other harnesses, however, where you'll have things that don't necessarily all go from the same place to the same place. Let me explain that a little bit. So, also up on the handlebars, there's another harness that we need to make that I haven't done yet that is for the gauges. So that'll be your, speedo, tack, all that, and then also your indicators, turn signals, oil pressure, neutral, high beam, all that stuff. So if you think about where those things get their inputs from, it's not necessarily coming from the M-Unit, it's coming from your neutral switch or your oil pressure switch or getting a signal from your headlight being turned on. So you'll need to just make sure that you route those appropriately and that the harness, you think through it so that it is still modular and you don't wind up, let's say, making a disconnection so you can remove, let's say, your handlebars and you go, oh no, I've got one wire that's still connected because it runs somewhere else and I didn't think about it. So part of the way we do this that makes it a little bit easier is somebody took the time to make this wiring diagram. Now, we didn't do this, but it's a great reference, and this can be found probably in a bunch of different places, but FXR Division has it on their website, and I'll include a link to that in the description. But what's nice about this is somebody really put a lot of effort into this, because what you have is on the component side of things, that would be your switches and all of the factory components, the wire colors that they have are going to be the factory wire colors. And it's mostly correct. There are a few little inconsistencies, but things change from year to year, so you got to just deal with that. But then what they show you is changing wire color to make it consistent for the M-Unit so that your harness makes sense. Now, where these wire colors for the M-Unit were created is there's another gentleman out there, I believe on Instagram, it's Motogadget FXR, and they create some wiring harness and builder kits so that you can do this a little easier than having to figure it out for yourself. And these wires that are the sort of M-Unit side of things are what you can buy from them. And so what's nice about it is the wires are all really small, they come in a nice length that you need, there's not a lot of waste. So it makes this job a lot easier. There's still a little bit that you need to think through in terms of, where do you start and where do you end and whatever else, but between the wiring kit along with the connectors and looking at this wiring diagram, you can start to get a sense of sort of mapping out what your project is going to be. So we've got some connections to make here. Probably the next thing I'm going to do is get the handlebars situated, so that would be running the new thinner gauge wiring through the bars and getting connectors made for everything that's up there. So we'll do that and then we'll bring it back to the bike and we'll check in and we'll see what that looks like. So these are our switch housings that have now been prepared with the wiring for the M-Unit. So what we've done here is following the way that these need to be wired for proper operation with the M-Unit. we've gone ahead and soldered on the leads that we're going to run back to the M-Unit into the short kind of tethers here on the original switch housings. Now, you don't necessarily have to make these connections all the way up here. You could, if you had, you know, the really long leads coming out of here, you could run the OE wires down through the bars and then make the connections onto these smaller wires of the appropriate colors down somewhere, you know, further down on the bike. In our case, the way we got these were used. We just picked them up, but they're in really good shape, so that's why I snagged them. The leads weren't very long, so we just made the connections up high. The other benefit to making the connections up at the top is because the M-Unit runs extremely low currents through these wires to the switch housings because they're not carrying any load, you can run this incredibly thin gauge wire, which makes it just way easier to run it through the bars and then, you know, route your harness down where you need it to go. So this is pretty straightforward. It's basically just looking at, you know, the connections inside and making sure you connect the right wires together. In some cases, you've got, you know, a single wire to a single wire. In other cases, you know, you've got a couple of wires that come together, in the case of the ground for the most part, to share those common grounds. I'll show you on this one. I don't know if this will be super visible or not, but you can see here, let me just dig this out. So there's our ground. And so we've got 4 wires that are all coming together into this one. And just what we did here, this is just a little, you know, kind of tip just to make it all sort of run easier in the bars. You can stagger these splices and go from one to the next to the next to the next, rather than trying to, you know, twist all 4 of these bigger wires together and connect it to this one thin one. It'll be a little sloppy and a little hard to get a good solder. So we just sort of step it this way, and we go from 4 to 1 pretty easily. So what used to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you know, kind of bigger wires comes down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 very thin gauge wires that we're going to then run down the right side of the handlebars. So these are both prepped and ready to go. So our next step is going to be to attach these to the handlebars and run the wires down, and then we'll put the bars back on the bike, again, just temporarily while we're still waiting on the things we're going to do on the front end. But at least we can get these mocked up into place and get the harness started to be run. So our next step, like I said, will be to get the handlebars done. So I'm going to grab those and we'll feed these through and we'll pick up from there. Okay, so with our wiring run through the bars, we are ready to put these back on the bike and continue with the wiring as a whole. A couple of things I want to point out. So these bars are obviously a modular setup. Let's just go through what we're using here. The bar itself is from Big Al's. The riser is from Bunking. The reason we went with this particular riser is 2 reasons. Number one, they are one of the few that allow you to run the wires actually through the legs of the riser, as opposed to just having to have it come down the middle. It's a little bit cleaner. The other is that we're using this Motoscope mini gauge from Motogadget, and they make a cover, or a bracket, I guess, whatever you want to call it, that this fits in, that comes with your indicator lights, that bolts up to the pattern of a stock Harley triple tree. So if we wanted to do something like a different riser that doesn't use this clamp, like, I don't know, a Kraus riser or something like that, we'd have to come up with a different solution for this gauge, but I think this is pretty clean and it's going to look pretty good. We also made sure to pick a kickback angle on the riser that is going to point this gauge in our line of sight, as opposed to being sort of pointed up at the sky or down too far. This one's going to fit pretty good as is. It's part of the reason we had the bars and risers mocked up on the bike before we did this. So a couple other details. These are OE Harley switch pods. They are from the 96 and up models, as opposed to the earlier sort of old style that you'd find on an FXR. And we've got our mini LED turn signals routed up in here too, that we use all the time. I'll put some links to those below in the description. Enough on that. I think we kind of went through what we've got here. I'm going to go ahead and get these just sort of mocked back up in place on the bike, and we'll continue from there. Okay, so After getting the wiring run through the bars and all of our harness put together, we've got the bars back up here on the bike. So I mentioned this in an earlier video, and maybe actually even a little earlier in this video, but what we did here was we used the Bung King riser because it allows us to run the wires through it. And with these really thin, small gauge wires and the way we, sort of wrap them up, it's really a ton of room going through these holes. So it's super easy to do and it looks really clean. So our bars are pretty much done at this point. Basically, obviously, we've got the turn signals up here that are going to get connected onto the clutch and brake perches once those go on. But all the wiring is complete at this point, which is great. So what we've got is there are a number of different leads that come out of the top of here. So you've got one harness that is for the gauge, that the wiring that comes out of it itself. You've got another one for the indicators that are part of the top clamp. You've got a right side and a left side wiring for each switch pod, and then you've got a left side and a right side turn signal. So there's a bunch of different individual kind of pieces that come through here. And then what we did is once they come out of the bottom of the bars, some of them go to the right and some of them go to the left, and we bundled those together based on how we were going to run the harness on the bike. So in our case, what I did was our switch pod wiring and turn signal wiring from both sides is going to run to the right side of the bike, and we put it all together inside of this wire loom here, and then we terminated the ends with the two Deutsch connectors that match up with the wiring harnesses that we made earlier, that I showed a little bit earlier in the video. On the other side of the bike, we did the same thing with the two different pieces of harness and all the wires that come from your indicators and also your gauge, and those are going to run to the other side of the bike, and I can find it over here. And then we've got another 12-pin connector, and this one is fully occupied, and this is going to run to the other side of the bike. Now, the reason how we picked which way would go which way is that we're going to be hiding the Deutsch connectors and those connections underneath the tank, and they are going to mount to the stabilizer bracket that's welded onto the frame. So we've got the sort of mount tabs that come with the Deutsch connectors riveted on, two on this side and one on the other side. And how we kind of did that was, where can we fit the connectors? I mean, they're pretty big, obviously, and you don't want to see them. So you gotta separate them, and then you gotta just make sure you run the wiring to the right side where the connectors are going to be. Obviously, ultimately, most of this stuff is going to have to wind up at this left side rear panel because that's where the M-Unit is. There is some wiring that's going to take place on this side, but it's going to be far less. We'll probably have our main circuit breaker over here, and maybe a couple of other things, but we'll see how it goes. So ultimately what's going to happen is, let me see if I can grab those two harnesses I made earlier. Here they are. So these, if you remember from a little earlier, are the bike side harnesses we started to make for the switches and for the turn signals. So these are going to get connected, and they're going to live right here. Now, I did test fit this with the tank. It does fit, and the tank does hide them. There's actually quite a bit of room under here to do this. So this side is pretty much done. This side, obviously, we haven't wrapped up and completed the harness yet because we just need to triple check and confirm that all these wires are going to the same place. So if we've got any wires that sort of need to break off and go another way, either for like a sensor pickup or anything like that, we'll need to kind of make sure we don't wrap them up and put them in the wrong place. So there are a few more steps we have to do here. Before I go ahead and complete getting these on, I have a third bike side harness I need to make for, the bike side of this, which is going to be, like I mentioned, the indicator lights and the gauge. And this one, we'll need to be particularly careful with making sure that we have the right leads going to the right places, because there's a lot of things on this one that don't go back to our main panel. They're going to go to other places. These are a little bit more consistently all going back there. In addition to that, we also just need to do the bike side and fender side for the rear lighting harness. So I'm going to work on those, and I think what we'll do is sort of check back in, and I'll sort of show you how these things start to come together, and we'll take a look at sort of how this harness sort of all comes together at the end. So we're in the process here of making the bike side harness for the indicators and gauge, and I figured I'd just jump in here and sort of show you how we do this. It's actually really easy. The actual mechanics of it, I know most people, or a lot of people I guess I should say, are put off by wiring and making these connections and all that stuff, and it's a little tedious and it's a little delicate, but with a little bit of practice you can do it pretty consistently well. So what we've got here is the Deutsch connector. I'm hoping the camera is picking all this stuff up. It's a little hard. If I turn this light off, it might be a little better. No, it's probably better with the light on. So basically I've got most of the connections done. I've got one more to do here, which I figured I would just sort of show you on the camera. But basically, this is what we did. So these are the instructions that came with the top clamp indicators, and then this is the Motogadget itself, or I'm sorry, not the Motogadget, the Motogadget gauge. So these are specific to mine. It doesn't really matter. The point is you'll get something like this with a pinout for whatever gauges or lights you're using, and if you're using the factory ones, that's fine. You know, you can sort of create this. It'll tell you what the input is for, what the polarity is, and that would just be, you know, positive or negative, how it's switched, and then what the wire color is coming out of the device. So what I did was just sort of use this as a starting point, and then I said, okay, these are all the wire colors that are coming out of the device. These are the wire colors that I'm using in the harness, and so we mark them next to each other, so we know purple goes to yellow, brown goes to white, white goes to green, etc. And then, in addition to that, mark the number of the pin in the Deutsch connector that we're using for it. So I did this and I wrote this all down when I made the handlebar side of the harness, which was saying, okay, I was soldering these wires onto these and plugging them into these pins. Same goes here, it's just a different way of writing it down, but basically we had, these are the 12 pins total. And then once we come here to do the bike side, it's pretty easy to say, okay, we know which wires now. Basically just plug all of these color wires that I wrote down into these pins on the bike side of the harness. So that's what we've been doing. Basically, it's pretty simple. I got one last to do. I'll just show you how that works. So I'm going to strip off a little bit of the end here. And because these wires are so thin, they actually fit a little bit better inside the connector, kind of doubled back over. We're using these are the pins. These are the female ones for the male side plug. They just slip over the wire. There are different styles of these pins. I ain't got quite enough wire exposed. I'm going to strip a little bit more off. There are different styles of these pins and how they connect. In the case for us in this example, we're using one of these all-side crimper type pins where it doesn't have the little tabs to fold over. It's just a little tube that it slides into. We slide the wire into it and we put it inside of the crimper and give it a couple of clamps. There we go. And then you pull it out, nice and secure, not going to go anywhere. And then that simply is going to go into our last hole in the connector. You sort of hear that positive click and retention. And now these are all done, and this is a little bit of a spaghetti mess over here that we're going to have to clean up. Once all the pins are in, we're just going to take the lock plate and put it up in the front here and push that down, and there we go. So our connector is made. We'll just tape this up, just put a little piece of tape right here to keep it secure. Now, this is the part that requires a little bit of planning and forethought, which is, obviously this is a mess and I'm going to clean it all up, but you need to start thinking about where do each of these wires go. It was easy to do this on the handlebar side because they all went to the same place. All the wires go to the gauge, or all the wires go to the indicator lights. This, like for example here, there's a power wire for both the indicator light and for the indicator lights as a whole and for the gauge. So that's pin number 1 and pin number 12 are those two powers for each of those two things. Well, we obviously know that the power is going to come from the same place on the bike, so we take those and we merge them together and solder them, and we just run one feed back to one of the auxiliary power outputs on the M-Unit. The same goes for the grounds. If you look at pin number 2 and pin number 11, which are the next two down, those are the ground wires for both of those two devices, and then we do a little solder and we merge them together and we run one ground back to the M-Unit. Now, as it happens on the FXR, we need to run power to the fuel sender, and the fuel sender lives right above where this plug is going to be. So rather than running a whole separate auxiliary power wire back to the M-Unit, I just tapped in an orange wire here, which coincidentally is the color that the power wire is on the fuel sender, and just tapped that in on the bike side of the harness, obviously, because the fuel sender, we don't want to have to remove that in order to get the bars off the bike. So we tap this into the bike side harness, and we'll run this power just straight up under the tank to where the fuel sender is, and we'll obviously have a plug and a quick disconnect there to be able to remove the tank. So it's those little details you need to sort of think about in advance in order to make sure that your harness isn't zigzagging all over the place, so you don't have to cut it open once you have it done. The same goes for some of these others, right? So you've got one of these wires, can't remember which, is the high beam indicator. So obviously that's going to need to be tapped into your high beam circuit. So you're going to have to figure out where you want to do that and think about that ahead of time. Same goes for your left and right turn signals, you know, brakes, all that other stuff. Brakes aren't actually one of these, just high beam left and right turn signals. So just think about all those in advance, write it down, draw it out before you go and you start making things permanent on the bike. So with that said, I'm going to clean this up and we'll check in with the next step. Okay, so with all of the individual sections of the harness made, and that was, you know, putting the Deutsch connectors together like we did over on the workbench with that one I was working on before, you start to lay them out on the bike and you get this kind of spaghetti mess. Now, you know, if you're not sufficiently confused and overwhelmed by looking at this, I don't blame you at all. However, what I will say is, as you spend time with this and doing the wiring, and it does take several hours to do this, and you're sort of going back and forth and making the harnesses and looking at the bike and the wiring diagrams, you start to think in the language of the wiring harness. And I don't know if that makes sense or not, but you start to see the wires and see the harnesses and know what they are instinctively, and sort of it's less random once you've been in it for a while, if that makes sense. So anyway, at this point, like I said, we went and put all these on the bike, and now the job is, like I said, you know, the off the bike sides of the harness, as in like the fender harness, the handlebar harness, the headlight harness, any of that, you know, those connections are easy because they all go to one place. As I mentioned, the bike side is where it gets a little complicated because not everything goes to the same place. Some things go to the M-Unit, some things are going to go to sensors, some things are going to go, you know, to other things, whatever. And in addition to that, you also have places where you're going to want to merge the on-bike sides of the harness together. And this is the moment where you're going to start to figure that out. And I'll show you some of those examples. So here, and I don't know if you can see this or not, but I'll do my best. You have these yellow and white wires running here. Now, originally what you had was this thicker one, yellow and white, is going to your turn signal harness, and that is supplying power from the M-Unit. When you hit your turn signals, that's what's going to the front turn signals to have them blink. So you also, though, have an input need for a right and left turn signal feed on your indicators, and that's what these smaller yellow and white wires are. Now, once you have the bike side of the harnesses in place and you know how the wires are going to run, you can tap one into the other, and that's what we've done. The two smaller wires are tapped. I'm sorry, there's a little bit of a mess here. The two smaller wires are tapped into the two bigger wires, so that when we activate the turn signals, you have a takeoff coming from each of these that's going up to your indicators on the dash. So on the bike side, those things can be connected. It's no big deal. And then on the plug is where they're separated, and they go to two different harnesses, so you can disconnect them independently. So those are two examples. You've got another one, and I don't know where it is. It's around here somewhere, is your high beam. So we went and ran the harness here, which is for the headlight. And so that's going to be your high beam, low beam, and ground. And we've tapped in here from the bike side of the harness for the indicators, your high beam indicator. And you can see here what I've also started done is I added some tape here, and this is basically starting to get the shape of the harness. So we know when we take this all off the bike, we know how much of this we can close up before they need to separate and go different places. So here at that tape joint, you're going down into the connector for your indicators, then you go forward and you go to this harness for your headlight. So those are some of the things you need to figure out and start making those connections in those harnesses. So all of the harnesses are on here and we're starting to put them together. And ultimately what we'll do in the next step is take the whole bike side harness off. We'll unplug all these plugs. You know, we got our rear here, indicators, switches, and turn signals are on the other side. We'll take that all off and we'll loom it up and we'll make a really nice factory looking harness. So the next step here, and this is a critical one where you sort of have to start thinking a little bit. The wiring diagram I referenced before is helpful, but you also have to start thinking about anything that might be on your bike that's not on the wiring diagram, is all the other things that don't necessarily go to one of these plugs. And so some of the things I've indicated are we need to run the wire for our key switch. We've got the wire for power to the ignition coil. We've got the wires for the horn. We've got the rear stoplight switch. So all those things are separate from these harnesses because they don't involve these plugs of like sort of a larger thing. However, if you want to do this clean, you've got wires running everywhere. So you may want to say, you know what? The power for my ignition coil, for example, is going to run from the M-Unit to your ignition coil, which is here. Well, you're going to have a big harness running up the backbone of the bike going to this Deutsch connector. So that wire for your ignition coil should be included in that so you're not running additional wires. The same goes for your horn and rear brake light switch. That goes down into the right side of the bike. Well, we're running 2 wires down into the right side of the bike already for our neutral indicator and our oil pressure light. So again, you want to marry all that together. So if you start to map that out now, you can sort of tape them in place, and then when you take it all off, you can put everything together in one harness. So those are some of the things that are on the wiring diagram. Your bike may be different. You may be running, I don't know, a second set of turn signals, or you may want to run an auxiliary power for you know, USB port or something like that, or power for a stereo. I don't know. It could be anything, but the point is now's the time to think about that so you're not running additional wires outside the harness. So basically where we're at is the main part of the harness is done. I'm going to go through and identify, or basically take the ones I've identified and start to add those in. And then our next step will be to take the whole thing off the bike once it's sort of taped and mocked in place, and we'll get it loomed up and ready for final installation. Okay, so fast forwarded in time a little bit here, and we've got all of our wiring identified and run where it needs to run. So went back to our diagram, like I said before, and sort of checked off all the additional circuits that weren't necessarily a part of the main harness, but might need to run with it so we could get that all bundled together. So maybe I'll zoom in a little bit here and show you a closer look on some of this, but just for starters where we are, what you can see that I've done here is before we sort of had this big pile of spaghetti, and we started to just make little sections of taping the harness together in the places where the wires are going to run together, right? So, you know, right here, you've got sort of, this is the main sort of bundle that's going to come back and go into the M-Unit. You get to about here under the frame, and we've got one section that splits off and comes up to the left side of the backbone. We've got another side that splits off and goes to the right. We've got one that sort of breaks off right here and goes to our ignition switch, which is something else we needed to add on. And then you've also got some wires here that are coming down the left side of the bike, but don't actually go to the M-Unit. They're going to come inside through into the battery compartment, and these are actually the pickups for the neutral indicator and oil pressure switch. So those are on the other side of the bike. So the tape in the places strategically placed not only helps to keep it all together, but when you go back to sort of make the wire loom and build this into a finished harness, you know where these wires need to exit and enter so you can get it all in the right place. Obviously you can see up here, we've got some things that we haven't hooked up yet, so they're just sort of free, and we'll deal with those as we get to them. So these 2 wires are going to run up to the console on the tank. So we don't quite know exactly what the lengths are yet, but we'll figure that out. Like once we get everything back in, this can be finished up while it's on the bike. We've got our headlight harness running here with an extra wire. That's this pink one. It's out of frame, but you can see it here. That is going to be our speedo sensor pickup. So that's not ready yet, but we just ran a nice long wire and coiled it up. We'll zoom in a little bit over here. Right. So you can see where the M-Unit actually is. This section here, coming through this lower opening, this is all wires that are coming from the other side, right side of the bike. So we've got our 2 wires to trigger the starter motor. We've got 2 ground wires here. We've got these 2. One is a brake light switch and the other one is the horn. And then we've got our rear tail light harness that's here. So this top plug is going back to the rear fender and that's all connected. And then the front side is just a little service loop here, and these connections are all going to get made into the M-Unit. And then what we've got here, this is sort of the bundle of the main harness that's going to come through this opening in the M-Unit. And one thing you want to be careful of here is obviously you've got wiring diagrams either that you made or were provided for all the various switches, you know, the pinouts that you've got, and theoretically you'd be able to tell what wire is what based on that. But what you want to be careful of is once you bundle multiple connectors together, the pinouts are going to overlap in terms of wire colors, so there's going to be some duplication in here. So you used to be able to tell them apart because the harnesses were separate, but once you merge them together, it all becomes one. So you want to just go ahead and label the things that you want to make sure you can tell apart. So for example, we didn't label every individual wire, but this is one bundle right here that I labeled lights, and what we've got in here is 2 ground wires, which are black, and then we've got our 2 turn signal wires, and then we've got our 2 high beam and low beam headlight wires. So those can all be distinguished. This larger section here, these are our switches, and so this is just the 8 wires coming back from the switches that we don't need to know what each of them are because we can refer to the pinout wiring diagram for that. And then in addition to those, let's see what else we've got in here. Here's a gray wire that's going to our coil. These 2 brown wires are for the key switch, and then we've got our auxiliary plus power. That's going to be providing power for the tank console gauge as well as the gauges on the handlebars. And then that's actually it for that harness. And then what we've got is just these other wires I mentioned before. So, you know, once you kind of get this put together, it's actually fairly simple. It's just a question of really getting to a point where it starts to make sense and it's not just colors and wires and numbers. So we'll take a quick look at the other side of the bike. So there's not quite as much to see over here because honestly there's not that much wiring on this side of the bike, but what you can see here is hopefully this little green wire poking out. This is going to be our neutral pickup. We've got this red wire that's going to go to the oil pressure sender, and we've got these 2 wires here that are running down to the brake light switch, and then the horn wires are kind of buried back behind the starter motor. So that's really it for the wiring on this side. There are some other things that are going to need to run. We've got just sort of hanging here that'll be run later. This is the input from the charging system, and that is going to connect up in this panel. And then we also have our ignition that's going to be changed. Right now this is just the factory ignition that would have had that separate external pack that would mount here. We're just going to swap that out for a self-contained ignition in the nose cone, so we can just have the one harness that runs from this nose cone up to the coil, and we deal with all the connections there. So that's kind of it for the wiring on this side. I'm not sure if it's in frame. Let me move a little bit on the camera so you can take a quick look over here. So here are our 2 plugs. I'm not sure if we showed this earlier or not, but these are just connected onto the stabilizer mount. One of these is for our handlebar switches, the other is for the front turn signals. So these harnesses just go up under the backbone, and we'll just tie up the harness to keep it off the top of the motor. But this is a great spot with a direct shot to make the connections that we already finished on the handlebars here. So those 2 will just plug in right there. So we're getting into the red zone here on this. So my next step is I'm going to remove that harness I just made from the bike all as one piece and start to bundle it together. And after that's done, we'll get it back on the bike and we'll start to make the connections on the M-Unit. Okay, so there it is. That is our complete, almost complete wiring harness removed from the bike. Now, I know it's not much to look at this point. The fact that it all just fits right here and really has, I don't know, not that many cable ends to it, really makes it appear very simple. And the truth of the matter is, it is very simple. One of the things about these, pre-CAN bus bikes, and particularly the ones without an ECU or really much of, onboard electronics, is every wire just has a function that's, controlling one thing or another, and it's all very, very straightforward and very simple and easy to understand, as opposed to sort of, computer wiring and CAN bus and things like that, where it doesn't make any logical sense. You just have to know which wires go where. This is actually pretty simple. The complication, in my own personal humble opinion, is getting all of this to be modular, removable, that everything is connectable and disconnectable, that nothing is bundled together that shouldn't be, getting everything to the right length. To be honest, with this in this state, it's almost as though I should just sort of measure everything and be able to just reproduce these without actually needing to have the bike present, because just making this all by itself is actually not that complicated. It's that you have to do it on the bike and sort of measure everything and get the lengths and the routing and confirm all of that. Once it's here on the table, it's pretty straightforward. So, like I said, from here, what we're going to do is start to wire loom this up. We'll use a couple of different types of materials to do that. I'll show it to you once we get it together. It's not going to take that long. We're countless hours into this as it is, but we're on the home stretch. So we'll get this put back together, have it looking nice and factory, and then our next step will be to lay it back on the bike and start to permanently attach it in place, and then we can start to make our bike connections. All right, there we go. All loomed up and ready to go back on the bike. So as I mentioned, we use a couple of different things to do this. In these larger sections where we had sort of the bigger bundles of wire, we used one of the nylon wrap looms. I think I've got a small one here. This is the 1/4" one. It's just sort of like unrolls and rolls back together. These are really nice. They're easy to go on. They're a little expensive maybe, but they work super well, and it's easy to get in and service the wires. In the smaller sections where we just had, 2, 3, 4 wires, something like that, we just use, it's like a 3M, I don't know what they call this, friction tape. It's sort of like gaffer's tape. It's just on not a big roll the way gaffer's tape is. So it's strong and it sticks really well. Actually, maybe a little even too well. It's a little difficult to get this off sometimes once you've put it on. So you usually want to be pretty sure you're pretty much done when you're going to go ahead and use that. We still have a couple little service loops here for the things I mentioned before that you don't have a final length yet for, but just sort of taped up the beginnings of them. And then we'll cut them to length and we'll fill in the rest with whatever we need. These junctions basically, use the different looms and then they come together and we just tape them. So that's your ignition switch, obviously, right there. That's the backbone right here. You got your switch for your gauges there, headlight. And then this is that smaller harness we spent a little time working on the right side of the bike for our neutral indicator, oil pressure, that's going to be the brake, and then the horn, that's the starter motor. I don't know where the horn is. Oh, you know what, I forgot to put the ends on the horn, so those two are the horn there. So we'll get those connected and keep moving. Actually, nope, that's the horn right there. I didn't miss them. There they are. But anyway, that is it for this part right here. Our next step is going to be to put this back on the bike and start making the connections. Most of this here is going to the M.Unit. We'll talk a little bit about making those connections, but also probably most importantly about programming the M.Unit to work for a Harley in this particular setup that we've done with the wiring. And we'll talk a little bit about how that works. So stick around. All right, so with our harness back on the bike and fully wrapped up like we did it before and kind of got that in place, went ahead and attached the M.Unit and started to make some of the connections. Now, obviously you can't see very well from this angle, but don't worry, I'm gonna zoom in and show you a little bit more. A little call out, this is not totally final. Left some of these wires a little bit long just to make sure we had some extra, but wanted to get it all hooked up and start to be able to test out the functionality. Everything for the most part seems to be working as it should. As we're sort of going, we're testing to make sure that things are working properly. One thing I'll call out is, I think this video has probably gotten pretty long at this point, so I'll probably do another video once we have all the connections made. We've got a few components like the ignition coil and things like that that aren't on the bike yet. So it's not totally functional. But once it is and we have everything done, I'll do another video that talks a little bit about the actual functionality of what this does and how it works. We'll talk a little bit about, you know, some of that now, but really in terms of sort of showing you and going through some of the indicator lights and some of that stuff, I think another video, once it's all fully buttoned up, I think will be more helpful. But basically, you know, we can talk a little bit about this. I'll zoom in and I'll sort of review some of the sort of features and benefits of this that I mentioned at the beginning of the video, but I think it might be a little bit more practical to understand it now that you can kind of see it wired and kind of see how it all goes together. So I'll zoom in now. Before I do that though, we'll walk around to the other side of the bike. I'll show you some of the connections over there and what that side panel looks like, and then we'll dig in a little bit more. Okay, so here we can see over on this side of the bike, there's obviously not a tremendous amount going on, and in fact, we really only have one thing, which is the 30 amp circuit breaker that you'll need to run in conjunction with the M.Unit. Now, the M.Unit itself, as we discussed, provides overload and short protection for all the circuits on the bike, so you eliminate all of the other fuses and circuit breakers. However, you still do need this one that is going to sit before the M.Unit and connection to the battery. So what you've got here on the copper stud side is a connection directly to the battery, and then on the silver stud side you have the connection to the M.Unit and to your voltage regulator, which is obviously the output from the charging system. So this is obviously very simple, very clean, and if you did have more things you needed to mount over here, you could certainly rearrange this and give yourself a whole lot more space. In fact, one of the things that you may wind up needing to mount here is the ignition control module box that you may or may not be running. If you're running either the original ignition system on the bike or an aftermarket external one that's similar to the OE one, you'll need to mount that box somewhere, and the OE location is right here, and you can do that by putting that box sort of in this part over here and then turning the circuit breaker vertical and mounting it next to it. In our case, we're going to be running an ignition that is entirely within the nose cone of the motor, so that is not going to be necessary in our case, so we wired it this way. Like I said, pretty simple over here, so let's jump back over and we'll dig into the more complex side of things. Okay, so here is our left side panel in all its glory. So this is the M.Unit pretty much fully wired up. As I mentioned before, it's not totally finished and buttoned up. We're going to shorten some of these leads and just tidy up the connections in here a little bit. But for the time being, I just wanted to leave a little bit of an extra loop just in case we needed to move some things around as we made the final connections. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a very sophisticated unit. However, it is pretty simple in its design once you start kind of wrapping your head around how it works. So we'll sort of start with the most basic function, most basic level of function, and we'll move up from there. So what you've got here is you've got two mounting bolts, top and bottom, that mount through the M.Unit and back to this plate. Now, this plate is isolated from the rest of the bike, so it itself would not be a ground, which is why the negative lead from the battery connects onto one of these two studs. Once you do that, you obviously now have ground in both studs and throughout this plate. So that's your two mounting studs. You then have a third stud, which is going to be your positive inputs. That's this large cable here coming from the battery. And then we do have one wire also connected to that, which is a 12 volt input constant hot that we needed for the M.Unit's functionality. So that does bring us to the next step of the functionality, which is, I think there can be a little bit of confusion when it comes to running these on Harleys, how some of these things can work, given that the Harley electrical system is not designed for a setup like this. So start with the actual switching on the power to the bike. Now, obviously in the original Harley wiring, the ignition switch itself, a lot of power runs through that. You've got a 12 volt input going through it. You've got an accessory and an ignition takeoff and switch within that key switch. And you've got 12 volt power that's supplying those accessories and some of the 12 volt things on the ignition circuit that actually run through that key switch. In the case of the M.Unit, obviously all that switching and functionality is handled within the M.Unit itself. So what you have is, and you just have to get a little bit comfortable with the vernacular that Motogadget uses, the bottom pin on your input side is labeled lock. And what that means in maybe more common language is key. So what this terminal does is, and this terminal is different than all the other terminals on this side because every terminal with the exception of this one is ground switched. You supply ground to any of these first terminals up to this last one, and ground is what's going to activate that input. The exception being your lock or key. When you provide a 12-volt input to this pin, that will activate and turn on the M.Unit. So what you do in the case of a Harley is, we've obviously got this 12-volt feed running off our battery connection. This runs out, up through the harness to our key switch, and then comes right back in this same colored brown wire, and runs into the lock terminal here. So when the key is turned on, 12-volt current flows through that and goes into the M.Unit. It's obviously super, super low draw because there's not any load on this. It's literally just turning on the M.Unit. So once you've got that done, and I'll show you what that looks like. We'll go ahead and turn the key switch. And you can see that the M.Unit sort of does this little dance of lights that goes around it, and then it turns on with some LED indicators showing you its current state. So basically, on the left side I mentioned you've got inputs, and these LEDs are showing you that the input is triggered by whatever you've got on the other end of it on this side. And then your right side are your outputs, and that is showing you which of these outputs are getting 12-volt power coming out of them. I think, a little bit more just about how we set this up. I'm trying to just keep this pretty specific to the Harley stuff. This plug here is our rear harness for the fender. So we've got outputs for our Alley Art strut lights, for the tail light, and that license plate light that's inside the tail light. So that's basically that. That's your output side. The input side for the harness comes down here, kind of loops around, and these are those outputs from the M.Unit going to the inputs on this. Over here, these two blue wires, this is for the trigger for your starter. So on these bikes, the starter relay is built into the starter motor. So it still needs a pretty good draw. It takes a pretty big draw, I should say, in order to fire the starter, even though it's running on a relay. So what they've given you is two outputs on here. So we run both these two blue wires down to the starter relay on the starter. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward, right? I mean, we've got a bunch of grounds we sort of married together down here, up here. These inputs are all coming from the handlebar switches, and then the outputs are, going to the various things they need to go to on the bike. Some things go back to the handlebars, some things go to the rear of the bike, and then we've got, other stuff over on the left side or the right side of the bike, sensors and pickups and stuff like that. So that's that. Here, I'll zoom out one more time. Okay, so I did leave the power on because I did want to show you, and hopefully you can see it there in the top of the screen. We do have the functionality in our motoscope gauge and also the indicator lights in the clamp. Those are all powered up and functional. We haven't done any programming with this yet. We'll get to that at a later state. There's a bunch of sort of options and settings you need to go through in terms of, units of measure and, how you want, your default displays to be, things like that. Maybe we'll show that in the later video what we do when we kind of go through the full functionality of the M.Unit and kind of show it to you working on the bike. But that stuff is there and functional. Obviously you can see, you hit a turn signal, you get a little blinking LED over here. That red is indicating the oil pressure switch. And then if you do high beam, you see the blue comes on here. And that green there is obviously the neutral. So all that is functional, working. We've got our harnesses all wrapped up. Like I mentioned, there's still some connections that need to be made. We need to do our button for the menu input for this, which is going to go on the tank dash, input for the fuel sender, the connections for our coil. All that stuff still needs to be done, but that's all kind of after the fact stuff now that we've got this all in place. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this key off. You see it all shuts off. But I'm really, really happy with how this went. this is, I will say, it's a tremendous amount of work. You know, once you get into it, it starts to feel a little bit less overwhelming, particularly if you've done it before. But even if you hadn't, like I mentioned earlier, you kind of start to think in the language of the wiring diagrams and the jargon that they're using, and the colors start to just, you know, make sense to you. When you're in it, it goes pretty quickly, and you can kind of work fast. You get kind of, you know, pretty fast with the crimping tools and all that stuff. But this is not something that is, I would say, by any means plug and play for a bike like this, right? So if you were in a situation, maybe you're watching this video and you're thinking, I've got an FXR, I've got a harness and everything works because it's a running, riding bike. I want to ditch the circuit breakers and I want to run one of these units. The question I think you might be having is, can I do that without totally replacing the whole harness, leave the factory harness in place, and just connect it to the M-Unit? I think my answer to that question would be yes, you can, but it would not be nearly as straightforward as just disconnecting wires here and plugging them into the M-Unit. There are going to be wires that are running in places that are not in the correct places based on the M-Unit, just in the way those circuits are laid out. One of the things about a Harley, right, is those handlebar switches. All that stuff is 12-volt inputs and 12-volt outputs that are switched by the switches in the handlebars. This is the exact opposite of that. They have ground inputs, and then it transmits that ground signal back to the M-Unit. Now, to be fair, just switch the 12-volt inputs for grounds and vice versa, and yeah, the switches will work either way. But you have to be cognizant of where the shared inputs and outputs are in some of those things. So in your factory switch housing harness, for example, there are going to be wires that are kind of tied together. There are certain wires you use, certain wires you don't use. You know, the headlight circuit is a little different. There's one wire that we don't use that's coming out of here. So it's all doable, and I'm not trying to say it's not. I definitely think it is. It's going to be fairly time consuming to kind of go through and really get a handle on the full, complete wiring you've got and understand what kind of inputs and connections need to be made, and then, you know, outputs on the other side. So it's doable, and I would say still very, very time consuming. But I would say that this is a really, really great thing to do on a bike that needs a new wiring harness. So if you've got just a totally mangled up electrical system on your bike, and, you know, rather than trying to diagnose it, and, you know, you got things cut and missing and wrong color wires and all that kind of stuff, just take it all out, do what we did, make a new harness, put this in, you'd be 100% good to go for the next foreseeable future. In a bike like ours, which had a perfect wiring harness with no cuts, no splices, no nothing, is it worth it to do this? I would say from a value proposition standpoint, no, it's not. These M-Units are expensive, and the wiring's expensive. And like I said, I mean, this took, granted we were working on other things and sort of intermittently, but doing the wiring and shooting this video, it's been over the course of 3 or 4 days. So it's a lot of time. And if you're not seeing what the benefit would be, because there's some functionality that you need that you don't have, there may be a better way to do some of those things. I did this on our bike mostly because I said we were going to, and also just because I thought it was kind of a cool thing to do, and I wasn't really worried about the value proposition of it. And frankly, I didn't think the bike we bought was going to have a harness that was this good, so we already had the M-Unit here ready to go, so we went with it. I think, you know, there are certain things that the factory harness, you know, you'd have to modify to run some of this stuff, like LED turn signals comes to mind. This manages those loads automatically, whereas obviously the factory system, you'd need to put load equalizers in. Those are inexpensive and easy to wire in. So if all you're doing is saying, I've got a perfectly good wiring harness, everything works, and I just want to run LED turn signals, this is not probably the right way to do that. If it was me, I would just get load equalizers. But like I said, these things are very cool and have a lot of functionality to them. I would also say, like, if this was a daily rider for you, which it's not going to be for us, you take a step up on the M-Unit and you go with the M-Unit Bluetooth version versus the basic that we got, and you get some more functionality, which is actually really cool. The most interesting one, I think, is the Bluetooth security that's built into it, where it will sense your phone being present, and that will act as the key to turn on the M.Unit. So the bike won't power up without your phone there. That's pretty cool. In this, it's 2022. Everyone's got their phone all the time. So some of that stuff is cool, and you can sort of look into it and dig into it. Like I said, there's other videos that other people have done who are way more into these than we are. This is sort of a special one-off thing for us. The other thing on these is that you really do have to be careful about the compatibility from a Harley-Davidson perspective. Obviously, the old bikes, you can kind of do whatever you want. The wiring is all very transparent and very easy to understand. As you sort of get newer and newer on the Harleys, and you've got ECUs to deal with, and CAN bus, and body control modules and all this stuff, no chance this is going to work on most of those bikes. They really just need to be wired the way they are. That said, in one of those modern bikes, I don't know why you'd want to put one of these in to begin with, so probably that's not super relevant. But anyway, I think we're going to leave this here. This is, like I said, mostly done. We just have a little bit of tidying up to do. We've got some programming to do, and adding making these other connections. So I'm going to leave that, like I said, for another video, and we're going to leave it here. And I'm going to do my best to get this edited quickly and get it up for you, because I know a lot of people have been asking about it. So I'm excited to get it out there, and hopefully be able to show you kind of what this can look like and how it can work on a Harley. Because I know there can be a lot of questions about that. These are pretty straightforward when you're working with custom controls and stuff like that, but getting this to work with factory style controls and all the factory components can be a little bit overwhelming, I think. So hopefully this is at least a little step in the direction of answering some of those questions for you. So with that, I'm going to leave you there, and we'll come back with another video when we move on to the next phase of this project, which frankly, I don't totally know what it is. We've got obviously some more work to do, but we're getting very close to getting this buttoned up for at least phase 1 of the build. So that's going to do it for us now. We'll see you next time.